the sun-drenched marble of the Hellenic world, once the beacon of classical civilization, now shimmered with a fractured, weary light. For 2 centuries, since the death of Alexander the Great, his vast empire had been carved into rival kingdoms, the Antigonids clinging to Macedon and much of mainland Greece, the Seleucids reigning over a sprawling Asian dominion, and the Ptolemies holding Egypt. These Hellenistic giants, perpetually locked in a dance of war and alliance, had sapped the strength of the ancient Greek city-states and their leagues, leaving them a patchwork of nominal autonomy, forever oscillating between the patronage of one king or another, their celebrated eleutheria, freedom, a fragile commodity dependent on external whim. Amidst this opulent but exhausted landscape, a new power was stirring in the West, a rising tide of disciplined legions and an unwavering civic resolve. Rome. Rome, having consolidated its dominion over the Italian peninsula, looked eastward with a gaze sharpened by burgeoning trade and a nascent sense of its own imperial destiny. Its ships, laden with goods, traversed the Adriatic, venturing into waters notoriously perilous, not from storms alone, but from the predatory corsairs of Illyria. It was through this maritime crucible that Roman power first brushed against the Hellenic world, not with the clash of armies on open fields, but with the quiet, insistent thrum of a protector asserting its reach. The catalyst for this initial contact was Queen Teuta of the RDA, whose Illyrian raiders, emboldened by their monarch's indifference to international law, terrorized the seas, striking at merchant vessels and coastal towns alike. Their swift, many-oared Lembus vessels swarmed the waters, seizing cargoes and enslaving crews, bringing the ancient fury of piracy back to prominence. For Rome, a power built on meticulously upheld treaties and the protection of its allies, this rising tide of lawlessness could not be ignored. Italian merchants, Roman citizens and allied Greek communities in the heel of Italy cried out for succour. In 230 BCE, a Roman embassy, dispatched to Teuta's court, met with scorn and outright murder. One envoy was slain, another captured and tortured. This act of brazen defiance, a direct affront to Roman dignitas, ignited the Republic's formidable wrath. The Senate, with characteristic efficiency, ordered a swift, overwhelming response. This was no war of conquest, at least not yet, but a punitive expedition aimed at re-establishing order and safeguarding Roman interests. Yet, in its very opportunism, it would sow the enduring seeds of dominion. In 229 BCE, a fleet of 200 Roman warships, accompanied by 20,000 legionaries, swept across the Adriatic, a sight unseen in those waters, a stark testament to Rome's growing naval might. The Greek city of Corcyra, the first Illyrian target, immediately defected to the Romans, weary of Illyrian tyranny. Its strategic harbour, a vital stepping stone to the Hellenic mainland, was swiftly secured. The campaigns that followed were brutal and swift. City after city, stronghold after stronghold, fell to Roman siegecraft and the inexorable advance of the legions. Demetrius of Pharos, a Greek opportunist governing a key Illyrian island, shrewdly betrayed Teuta, aligning himself with the Romans, providing them with invaluable local intelligence and further entrenching their presence. By 228 BCE, the First Illyrian War was over. Teuta was forced to abdicate, paying tribute and confining her rule to a tiny inland territory. Rome, however, did not annex the land outright. Instead, it carefully established a series of protectorates along the Illyrian coast, ostensibly to defend the Greek cities there from further piracy and to manage the affairs of newly freed populations. Demetrius of Pharos was rewarded with a significant client kingdom. This was Rome's masterstroke, presenting itself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Across the Adriatic, the Greek city-states and leagues, perpetually squabbling and overshadowed by Macedonian power, initially welcomed Rome's intervention. Here, they believed, was a new counterweight, a powerful ally against the Antigonid kings. The Achaean League, the Aetolian League, even Athens and Corinth sent messages of congratulation and gratitude. Yet, embedded within this relief and gratitude was a subtle shift, a quiet forging of chains. Rome had demonstrated its willingness and ability to intervene decisively in Hellenic affairs, establishing a foothold, a precedent. Its protectorates were not merely strategic outposts, they were declarations of influence, testaments to Rome's fides, its sacred duty to protect those under its care. This protection, however, was never truly egalitarian. It was inherently hierarchical, demanding loyalty and obedience in return for peace and security. The very language of liberation and protection served to disguise a nascent imperial impulse. The Greeks, in their desperate search for a balance of power, had inadvertently invited a new, more formidable player onto their stage, one whose concept of friendship was inextricably linked to its own burgeoning authority. The quiet splash of Roman oars in the Adriatic had sent ripples across the Aegean, ripples that would, in time, become a tsunami. The brush of an opportunistic protector had, with chilling foresight, already sown the undeniable seeds of future dominion. The fragile equilibrium that Rome had so opportunistically established in Illyria, under the guise of protecting Greek freedom, was not destined for long-term tranquility. The subtle binding of Greek destiny to Rome's burgeoning authority, glimpsed in the aftermath of the First Illyrian War, was soon to tighten into a far more explicit entanglement. The burgeoning republic had indeed cast its shadow eastward, but it was a diffuse, tentative shade. That shadow would soon condense sharp and unmistakable over the Hellenic world, revealing Rome as a formidable new power in the east. This dramatic shift was largely precipitated by the ambitions of Philip V, the young and energetic king of Macedon, and the colossal, continent-spanning conflict that was the Second Punic War. Philip V, a monarch of significant charisma and ruthless resolve, ascended the Antigonid throne with the burning desire to restore Macedon to its former glory. He inherited a kingdom with a rich military tradition and a deep-seated pride that chafed under any perceived slight to its preeminence in Greece. He saw in the ceaseless squabbles of the Aetolian and Achaean leagues and the inherent weakness of the Hellenic city-states, not partners, but vassals in waiting. The Aetolians, ever bellicose and opportunistically self-serving, and the Achaeans, seeking a bulwark against Aetolian aggression and Spartan resurgence, were both potential assets or obstacles in Philip's grand designs. Yet, even Philip, for all his martial prowess and political acumen, might have hesitated to directly challenge the burgeoning Roman sphere of influence had not an unforeseen cataclysm gripped the Western Mediterranean, the meteoric rise of Hannibal Barca. Hannibal, the Carthaginian general of legend, was systematically dismantling Roman power on the Italian peninsula, inflicting humiliating defeats at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and, most devastatingly, Cannae in 216 BCE. Rome reeled, its legions annihilated, its very existence threatened. To Philip, observing from across the Adriatic, this was not merely a distant conflict, it was an unparalleled opportunity, a divine dispensation. With Rome bleeding in its own backyard, entangled in a fight for survival, Macedon could expand unchecked, reasserting its dominance over Greece, perhaps even seizing Rome's Illyrian protectorates without serious reprisal. The temptation proved irresistible. In 215 BCE, Philip dispatched envoys across the Adriatic, not to challenge Rome openly, but to forge a secret, audacious alliance with Hannibal. The terms of their clandestine pact were breathtaking in their ambition. Philip would aid Hannibal in Italy, and in return Hannibal would support Philip in consolidating Macedonian power over Greece and Illyria, and should Rome fall, the two powers would divide its dominion. This was a clear, unambiguous declaration of hostility against Rome, an overt threat to its eastern flank. But fate and Roman vigilance intervened. As Philip's envoys sailed back from Capua, their ship was intercepted by Roman naval patrols off the Apulian coast. The secret treaty, carefully sealed, was discovered. When the papyrus scrolls were unrolled and the audacious terms translated in the Roman Senate, the outrage was profound, the shock palpable. Despite the existential threat posed by Hannibal's continued presence in Italy, Rome would not allow a major Hellenistic power to openly align with its deadliest enemy. A second war, an Eastern war, was now unavoidable. Thus, in 214 BCE, Rome decisively entered the Greek sphere with the First Macedonian War, not as a tentative protector, but as a power forced to project its military might far beyond its immediate borders, even amidst its gravest crisis. However, Rome was not in a position to deploy the full might of its legions. Hannibal still haunted Italy, and every available man and resource were desperately needed there. Instead, Rome adopted a strategy of containment and alliance building, a testament to its formidable diplomatic acumen. A small Roman fleet, coupled with a limited expeditionary force, was dispatched to the Adriatic, under commanders like Marcus Valerius Laevinus and Publius Sulpicius Galba Maximus. Their primary objective was not outright conquest of Macedon, but rather to keep Philip engaged, to tie down his forces in Greece, preventing him from ever reaching Hannibal in Italy. To achieve this, Rome shrewdly exploited the long-standing animosities and shifting loyalties within Greece itself. The Aetolian League, ever wary of Macedonian hegemony and smarting from previous conflicts with Philip, proved a willing ally. They saw in Rome not a future master, but a powerful distant counterweight to their immediate rival. The Aetolians, with their formidable light infantry and fierce local knowledge, became Rome's primary land-based proxy. Later, Attalus I of Pergamon, a shrewd Hellenistic monarch in Asia Minor, joined the coalition, bringing his navy and resources into the struggle, motivated by his own territorial ambitions and fears of a resurgent Macedon. Rhodes, a powerful naval state, also lent its considerable maritime strength to the Roman-led alliance. The First Macedonian War, therefore, was a complex, protracted and largely indecisive affair for Rome. It was fought in the shadows of the Greater Punic conflict, with Roman commanders forced to operate with severely limited resources. Naval engagements punctuated the Adriatic and Aegean, with Roman and Allied fleets clashing with Macedonian squadrons, securing vital sea lanes and supporting coastal operations. On land, the conflict often devolved into brutal raids and sieges, as Aetolian forces, backed by Roman detachments, harried Macedonian territories, while Philip struggled to maintain control over his Greek allies and to repel incursions. Philip V, despite facing a multi-front war against Romans, Aetolians and Pergamene forces, proved resilient. He manoeuvred skillfully, winning some minor victories, but was never able to break the Roman-led coalition or achieve a decisive strategic advantage. He retook some lost territories, inflicted defeats on his Greek adversaries, and demonstrated that Macedon was still a power to be reckoned with. Yet, he could not shake off the Roman presence, nor could he deliver on his promise to Hannibal. By 205 BCE, both sides were exhausted. Rome, after nearly a decade of relentless warfare against Hannibal, yearned for peace, or at least a temporary cessation of hostilities in the east. Philip, while not defeated, recognized the futility of trying to break the Roman Aetolian Pergamene blockade and the impossibility of reaching Italy with Hannibal's cause now fading. The Peace of Phenice, mediated by neutral Rhodes and Egypt, formally ended the First Macedonian War. On paper, it was largely a return to the status quo ante bellum. Philip retained most of his territories, though Rome secured its Illyrian protectorates more formally, and its Greek allies, notably the Aetolians and Pergamon, had their gains recognised. Yet this peace was far more than a mere standstill. It marked Rome's definitive entry into the Greek sphere, not as a casual observer or a fleeting punitive force, but as an active, sustained military and diplomatic participant. The war had revealed a formidable new power in the east. Even when stretched to its breaking point by Hannibal, Rome had demonstrated an astonishing capacity to project its influence, to form and maintain complex alliances, and to tie down a major Hellenistic monarch. The Greek world, once dominated by the Ptolemies, Seleucids and Antigonids, now had to contend with a fourth, increasingly powerful player. The First Macedonian War irrevocably altered the Hellenistic balance of power, forcing the kings and leagues to acknowledge Rome's formidable and growing presence. This was not yet dominion, but it was the undeniable, unsettling prelude to it, and the stage was now set for the conflicts that would determine the ultimate fate of Greece. Philip V, his ambitions merely postponed, not abandoned, would soon learn the full, inexorable extent of Rome's resolve. The embers of the First Macedonian War, though seemingly extinguished by the Peace of Phenice in 205 BCE, continued to smoulder beneath the surface of the Hellenic world. Philip V, the ambitious king of Macedon, nursed his grievances, and once Rome was truly victorious over Hannibal in the Second Punic War, 201 BCE, he resumed his expansionist policies with renewed vigour. His eyes turned eastward towards the prosperous Greek city-states of the Aegean and the rich territories of Asia Minor held by Rhodes and Pergamon. These were ancient Hellenic powers, proud and wealthy, but ultimately unable to collectively withstand a determined Macedonian monarch. Philip's aggressive naval campaigns in the Aegean, his sieges of allied Greek cities, and his brazen alliance with Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, an agreement to carve up the Egyptian Ptolemaic Empire's overseas possessions, sent tremors of alarm throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Rhodes, with its mighty fleet, and Pergamon, with its shrewd and increasingly Hellenized kings, appealed to Rome, reminding the Republic of its self-proclaimed role as the guardian of Greek Eleutheria. For Rome, having just emerged from the existential threat of Hannibal, the prospect of another war was daunting. The Republic was weary, its manpower depleted, its treasury strained. Yet, the lessons of the First Macedonian War were stark. Allowing a major Hellenistic power to expand unchecked, especially one with a history of alliances with Rome's enemies, was a dangerous precedent. The Senate, ever pragmatic, understood that neglecting its allies in the east would undermine its burgeoning authority and invite future challenges to its commercial and strategic interests. Thus, in 200 BCE, Rome reluctantly declared the Second Macedonian War. This time, however, the commitment was unequivocal. No longer would Rome fight through proxies alone. This was to be a full-scale deployment of legions. The primary objective, as skillfully articulated by Roman diplomats, was not conquest, but the liberation of Greece from Macedonian tyranny. To lead this crucial endeavour, the Senate chose Titus Quinctius Flaminius, a young, brilliant, and remarkably Hellenophilic consul. Flaminius was not merely a military commander, he was a master of diplomacy and propaganda. He understood that to succeed in Greece, he needed to win not just battles, but hearts and minds. He cultivated an image as a genuine admirer of Greek culture and a sincere champion of their freedom, often speaking in Greek himself, a rare and deeply impressive gesture for a Roman aristocrat. Flaminius's arrival in Greece was met with cautious optimism by the various Greek leagues and city-states. Many had grown disillusioned with Philip's heavy-handed rule and the constant warfare he brought. The Achaean League, a powerful confederation in the Peloponnese, after much internal debate, ultimately defected from Philip and allied with Rome. Athens, Sparta, and others, weary of the cycles of subjugation, also lent their support, seeing in Rome a potential arbiter of peace, a distant power less likely to impose its will than the immediate threat of Macedon. Flaminius, through tireless negotiation and carefully chosen acts of clemency, skillfully detached many of Philip's allies, narrowing the Macedonian king's support base. The decisive confrontation came in 197 BCE on the rolling hills of Thessaly, near a ridge appropriately named Cynoscephalae, Dog's Heads, for its rugged, uneven terrain. Here, Philip's formidable Macedonian phalanx, 16,000 strong with their bristling sarissas, long pikes, faced off against Flaminius's equally numerous but far more flexible Roman legions. Philip's phalanx, renowned for its impenetrable pike wall on flat ground, struggled to maintain cohesion on the broken, undulating landscape. The long sarissas, which could hold an enemy at bay from afar, became cumbersome and unmanageable when the tightly packed ranks were forced over uneven ground, creating gaps and vulnerabilities. The battle raged for hours. On Philip's right wing, his phalanx achieved initial success, pushing back the Roman left. The sheer momentum and terrifying reach of the Macedonian pikes threatened to envelop the legions, but on the Roman right, Flaminius, personally leading his legions, skillfully engaged Philip's left wing, which was still in the process of forming up on the difficult terrain. The Roman manipuli, smaller and more manoeuvrable than the massive phalanx blocks, exploited every crevice and rise, darting into the gaps that inevitably appeared in the Macedonian line. The decisive moment came when a nameless Roman tribune, demonstrating the initiative that was a hallmark of the Roman military system, saw an opportunity. Without orders, he detached 20 manipuli from the Roman right wing, swinging them around Philip's exposed left flank. This was the stroke that shattered the phalanx. Attacked from the rear, the rigid Macedonian formation disintegrated. The sarissas, so formidable in assault, became an impediment in retreat, trapping the Macedonian soldiers. The battle quickly turned into a rout. Thousands of Macedonians were slaughtered or captured. Philip V barely escaped with his life, his army broken, his power irrevocably diminished. The defeat at Cynoscephalae was catastrophic for Macedon. Philip V was forced to sue for peace, accepting harsh terms dictated by Rome. He was stripped of all his foreign possessions, including his garrisons in Greece and Asia Minor, compelled to surrender his formidable navy, pay a crushing war indemnity of 1,000 talents, and effectively become a client king of Rome, prohibited from making war without Roman approval. Macedon, though not formally annexed, was militarily crippled and politically neutralised. The true masterstroke of Flaminius, however, came a year later, in 196 BCE, at the Isthmian Games in Corinth. This was one of the 4 great Panhellenic festivals, a sacred gathering where Greeks from across the Hellenic world competed in athletics and artistry, a place steeped in the ancient ideals of shared heritage and freedom. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, but also with apprehension. The Greeks had seen foreign powers replace foreign powers before. Would Rome simply step into Macedon's shoes? Would their liberation merely be a change of masters? As the games were about to begin, a Roman herald, accompanied by Flaminius, stepped into the packed stadium. The trumpet blast that announced the proclamation echoed through the hushed crowd. Then, in a voice clear and resounding, the herald declared, "The Roman Senate and T. Quinctius Flaminius the Imperator, having vanquished King Philip and the Macedonians, restore to all the Greeks their freedom, with their laws, and without garrisons, and without tribute." The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. A collective gasp of disbelief followed by a thunderous roar of jubilation erupted from the thousands gathered. Coins rained down into the arena. Laurel wreaths were torn from heads and tossed towards Flaminius. The cries of "Sota, Saviour," and "Eleutheria, freedom," filled the air so loud that even the trumpet blast announcing the races could not be heard. Spectators, weeping with joy, rushed forward, desperate to touch the hand of Flaminius, nearly crushing him in their ecstatic embrace. This was the moment the Greeks had dreamed of for centuries, the return of their ancient liberties, seemingly gifted by a benevolent, distant power. Yet this declaration, so celebrated and seemingly magnanimous, was a profound act of strategic genius that subtly, but irrevocably, bound the destiny of Greece to Rome's burgeoning authority. The freedom was a gift, not an inherent right reclaimed by Greek arms. This created an enduring debt of gratitude, a moral and political obligation that would be invoked repeatedly by Rome. By restoring freedom, Rome positioned itself as its ultimate guarantor, implying that any future threats to this freedom, whether from internal Greek squabbles or external Hellenistic kings, would necessitate further Roman intervention. Macedon, the traditional regional hegemon, was neutralised, leaving a power vacuum that only Rome could, and eventually would, fill. The Greeks were free, yes, but free under Rome's watchful, increasingly omnipresent eye. Any true autonomy was now contingent on Roman approval. Flaminius, after receiving an almost unprecedented outpouring of adoration, meticulously oversaw the withdrawal of all Roman garrisons, further cementing the illusion of genuine liberation before departing Greece. But the seeds of future dominion, disguised as the blossoms of freedom, had been firmly planted, destined to yield a harvest of Roman rule. The triumphant cries of "Eleutheria" that had so ecstatically greeted Flaminius at the Isthmian Games, proclaiming the liberation of Greece, were still echoing in the memory of the Hellenic world. Rome had made good on its promise, withdrawing its legions and allowing the Greek city-states and leagues to resume their ancient, if often fractious, autonomy. Yet this newfound freedom was an unstable gift, a vacuum waiting to be filled. Philip V of Macedon, though chastened, remained a lingering shadow, but a new, far grander player was about to stride onto the stage, challenging Rome's nascent influence with an audacity born of immense power and a self-perception as the rightful heir to Alexander the Great. This was Antiochus III, the Seleucid king, the Great, whose vast empire stretched from the Aegean to the borders of India, a monarch of formidable ambition and military prowess. Antiochus, having spent 2 decades tirelessly restoring the Seleucid Empire to its former glory, reconquering lost territories, quelling rebellious satrapies, and even campaigning successfully in the east as far as Bactria and India, earning him his epithet, now turned his gaze westward. He dreamed of reuniting Alexander's scattered dominion, and saw in the fragmented Hellenic world a natural extension of his sphere of influence. His aggressive expansion into Asia Minor brought him into immediate conflict with Rome's most loyal and steadfast allies in the east, the wealthy island naval power of Rhodes, and the dynamic, expansionist kingdom of Pergamon under its brilliant king Eumenes II. These states, fearing being swallowed by the Seleucid Leviathan, had been instrumental in keeping Philip V in check and now looked to Rome, their powerful new patron, for protection. More provocatively still, Antiochus advanced into Thrace, rebuilding the strategically vital city of Lysimachia, a traditional Macedonian stronghold. This was a clear message. He, not Rome, would dictate the balance of power in the Aegean and beyond. The most dangerous affront to Roman authority, however, lay not in his territorial conquests, but in the dark council he harboured. Hannibal Barca, Rome's most enduring and deadly enemy, who had fled Carthage after its defeat, had found refuge at Antiochus's court. The Carthaginian general, a living embodiment of Roman dread, offered the Seleucid king his unparalleled military acumen, urging him to take the fight directly to Italy. This was an unpardonable sin in Roman eyes, a direct challenge to their security, a signal that Antiochus not only defied Rome's influence, but sought its very destruction. Rome, still recovering from the devastating toll of the Punic Wars, was wary of another massive conflict. Initial diplomatic overtures were sent to Antiochus, polite but firm warnings against crossing into Europe or interfering with the affairs of the now free Greeks. Antiochus, basking in his imperial success and misjudging Rome's resolve, dismissed these warnings with an air of aristocratic disdain. He believed Rome, exhausted and depleted, was in no position to project power so far east. This miscalculation would prove his undoing. The Aetolian League, ever opportunistic and feeling betrayed by Rome's settlement in Greece, which they felt had favoured their rivals, the Achaeans, and had not rewarded their own significant contributions against Philip V, saw in Antiochus a new champion. In 192 BCE, they formally invited Antiochus into Greece, promising widespread support and portraying him as the true liberator, the one who would truly expel Roman influence. Antiochus landed a relatively small force of around 10,000 men in Greece, establishing a base in Thessaly, expecting a pan-Hellenic uprising in his favour. But Antiochus's grand entrance was met with a lukewarm reception. Many Greek states, remembering Flaminius's magnanimity and wary of exchanging one powerful master for another, remained loyal to Rome or cautiously neutral. The Achaean League in particular actively opposed him. Rome's response, however, was swift and decisive. Manius Acilius Glabrio led a powerful Roman army into Greece, and in 191 BCE, he confronted Antiochus at the legendary pass of Thermopylae. This was not the Thermopylae of Leonidas, but a later, less glorious chapter. Antiochus, with his Seleucid forces and Aetolian allies, fortified the pass, hoping to replicate the Spartan stand. Yet, the Romans, with their overwhelming numbers and tactical acumen, were not to be denied. Cato the Elder, in a brilliant flanking manoeuvre, led a detachment over the mountainous terrain, surprising Antiochus's rear and shattering his lines. Antiochus's army was crushed, and he himself barely escaped, fleeing back to Asia Minor, his hopes of securing a foothold in Greece irrevocably dashed. Driven from Europe, Antiochus believed the natural barrier of the Aegean Sea and the vastness of Asia Minor would protect him. But Rome, with a chilling resolve, was not content with merely repelling him. The Senate declared that the Seleucid threat must be neutralized entirely, and the audacious act of pursuing Antiochus into Asia Minor was sanctioned. In 190 BCE, under the command of Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus, accompanied by his far more famous brother, the victor of Zama, Scipio Africanus, whose tactical genius, though he was ill, likely still guided his brother, the Roman legions prepared to cross the Hellespont. This was a momentous undertaking, the first time a major Roman army would set foot on Asian soil. Before the legions could cross, however, naval supremacy was vital. Antiochus possessed a powerful fleet, commanded in part by Hannibal himself. But the combined Roman, Rhodian and Pergamene fleets proved superior. In a series of decisive naval battles, particularly at Myonessus, the Seleucid navy was utterly defeated. Hannibal, though defeated in a naval engagement, managed to escape the Roman clutches once more, a ghost of Rome's past. With the Aegean secured, the vast Roman army, swelled by allied contingents, marched unopposed across the Hellespont, entering the heart of Seleucid power. The ultimate confrontation came in the winter of 190 BCE, near the city of Magnesia at Sipylum. Antiochus had assembled a truly colossal army, a mosaic of the Hellenistic East. 16,000 elite Seleucid phalangites with their bristling sarissas, Galatian mercenary cavalry, Scythian chariots, light-armed archers and slingers from across his vast empire, and a terrifying array of 54 war elephants, a unit still capable of striking fear into ancient armies. His total force numbered between 60,000 and 70,000 men, dwarfing the Roman and Pergamene allied army of approximately 30,000, which Lucius Scipio commanded. Antiochus believed sheer numbers and the exotic array of his forces would intimidate and overwhelm the legions. The battle began with a series of frantic skirmishes. Antiochus deployed his Scythian chariots, but they were quickly disorganized and routed by Roman light infantry and cavalry screens. On the Roman right flank, Eumenes II of Pergamon, leading his cavalry with audacious skill, drove back Antiochus's left wing, exposing the flank of the main Seleucid phalanx. Meanwhile, on the Roman left, Lucius Scipio's legions engaged the Seleucid phalanx head-on. The sheer weight and momentum of the phalanx initially held, but its inherent inflexibility on the open ground and its exposed flanks created fatal vulnerabilities. The decisive moment of Magnesia was a testament to Roman tactical adaptability and discipline. As Antiochus, with a surge of impetuous courage, led his right-wing cavalry in a desperate charge against the Roman left, he inadvertently created a gaping hole in his own line. The Roman legions, seizing the moment, poured through the breach. Attacked from multiple directions, the massive Seleucid phalanx, once an impenetrable wall of pikes, dissolved into a terrified mob. The war elephants, usually a terrifying weapon, became a liability in the rout, trampling their own fleeing soldiers. The carnage was immense. Tens of thousands of Seleucid soldiers were slaughtered or captured, while Roman losses were astonishingly light. Antiochus himself, his imperial dreams shattered, fled the field. Magnesia was more than a victory. It was an unequivocal declaration of Roman supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean. The Treaty of Apamea, dictated in 188 BCE, imposed crippling terms. Antiochus was forced to surrender all his territories west of the Taurus Mountains, effectively ceding all of Asia Minor. He was compelled to pay a staggering war indemnity of 15,000 talents over 12 years, a sum that would cripple his treasury, and to surrender his entire navy, prohibited from sailing west of the Callicadnus River. He also had to hand over Hannibal Barca, though Hannibal managed to evade capture once more, only to commit suicide years later rather than fall into Roman hands. Crucially, Rome again chose not to annex vast swathes of land directly. Instead, it systematically distributed Antiochus's former territories among its loyal allies. Eumenes II of Pergamon received immense new lands, becoming the dominant power in Asia Minor, while Rhodes also gained significant territories. This created a new geopolitical order, a vast network of client states whose power and very existence were now entirely dependent on Roman goodwill. The shadow Rome cast over the Hellenistic East was no longer diffused or tentative. It was absolute and irreversible. No longer could the Greek city-states appeal to a great independent Hellenistic king for balance against Rome, for no such power remained. The freedom Rome had granted Greece was now encased within a gilded cage of Roman client states, its destiny inextricably bound to the will of the Republic. The path to direct dominion, though still years away, was now irrevocably paved. The thunderous defeat of Antiochus III at Magnesia had unequivocally established Rome as the paramount power in the eastern Mediterranean. Its shadow now stretched irrevocably across the entire Hellenistic East, shaping the destinies of kings and leagues alike. Yet, in mainland Greece, a lingering bastion of potential challenge remained: Macedon. Though crippled by the Second Macedonian War and stripped of its overseas territories, the Antigonid kingdom, with its rich history and fierce martial spirit, still possessed a monarch who dreamed of restoring its ancient glory. Philip V, though compelled to live as a Roman client, spent his remaining years diligently rebuilding his kingdom, reforming his army, and carefully navigating the treacherous currents of Roman suspicion. He died in 179 BCE, leaving his crown to his highly capable and equally ambitious son Perseus. Perseus of Macedon was a man of keen intellect, immense energy, and a deep-seated resentment of Roman dominance. Unlike his father, who had been compelled to accept Rome's terms, Perseus viewed Rome's liberation of Greece as a cynical pretense, a subtle form of subjugation that had effectively turned Macedon into a gilded cage. He inherited a treasury replenished by Philip's prudent management, and an army that, though smaller, was well-trained and loyal. Perseus harboured no illusions about directly challenging Rome in the manner of his predecessors. He knew the immense might of the Republic. Instead, he embarked on a cunning, multifaceted strategy designed to gradually undermine Roman influence, reassert Macedonian leadership in Greece, and build a coalition of allies strong enough to resist future Roman encroachment. His strategy began with shrewd diplomacy. Perseus cultivated alliances with traditional Macedonian clients, such as the Illyrian king Gentius and the powerful Thracian tribes. More subtly, he began to appeal to the disaffected elements within the Greek city-states and leagues. Many Greeks, while initially ecstatic about their freedom, were now chafing under the increasingly intrusive Roman presence. Roman proconsuls and commissioners, despite Flaminius's earlier promises, frequently intervened in internal Greek affairs, dictating political settlements, imposing fines, and supporting pro-Roman oligarchs. The freedom felt more like a leash held by a distant, often arbitrary master. Perseus shrewdly positioned himself as a champion of Pan-Hellenic unity, advocating for the traditional Greek Eleutheria that Rome now seemed to threaten. He married the daughter of Seleucus IV, further cementing ties with a major Hellenistic power, and offered his sister to Prusias II of Bithynia, drawing more kingdoms into his orbit. He abolished his father's debts owed by Greek cities, repatriated exiles, and rebuilt infrastructure, earning him considerable goodwill among common Greeks. He revitalized the Macedonian army, increasing its numbers and re-equipping the phalanx with new, longer sarissas and improved armour. These actions, all ostensibly within the bounds of his treaty with Rome, were nevertheless interpreted by the Romans as deliberate provocations, a direct challenge to their carefully constructed order in the east. Eumenes II of Pergamon, Rome's most loyal client king in Asia Minor, a man whose prosperity was entirely dependent on Roman patronage, became Perseus's most vocal accuser. Travelling to Rome, Eumenes delivered a passionate, lengthy indictment against Perseus in the Senate, detailing every perceived transgression, every subtle manoeuvre, every rumoured alliance. He painted a picture of a resurgent Macedon, bent on destroying Roman influence and re-enslaving Greece. The Roman Senate, always sensitive to threats to its dignitaries and its control over its client states, took Eumenes' accusations gravely. Despite initial hesitations and debates within the Senate, the mounting evidence of Perseus' activities, coupled with Roman suspicions about his true intentions, inexorably led to war. In 171 BCE, Rome declared the Third Macedonian War. This was to be a far more brutal and uncompromising conflict than the previous two. Rome was tired of playing the game of liberator. The time for decisive action had come. The initial years of the war, however, were surprisingly difficult for Rome. Perseus, leading his revitalized Macedonian army, proved a formidable adversary. He was a tactically astute commander, carefully avoiding decisive engagements with the main Roman legions while launching successful raids, utilizing guerrilla tactics, and exploiting the difficult terrain of Macedon. The Roman commanders, often rotating annually and lacking deep knowledge of the local geography or the Macedonian style of warfare, struggled. They suffered several minor defeats and logistical setbacks, leading to a degree of frustration and unease in Rome. The disciplined legions found it challenging to corner and decisively engage the elusive Macedonian king. This initial Roman stumbling emboldened some Greek states to waver in their loyalty, sensing perhaps that Macedon might yet prevail. But Rome, with its unparalleled reserves of manpower and its unyielding resolve, would not be denied. In 168 BCE, the Senate sent a new commander to Macedon, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a veteran general of the old school, known for his strict discipline, strategic brilliance, and incorruptibility. Paulus immediately began to restore order and morale to the Roman forces, imposing stringent discipline and undertaking careful logistical preparations. He understood that to defeat Perseus, he needed to force a decisive battle, to pit the Roman legionary system directly against the Macedonian phalanx on terms favourable to Rome. That decisive confrontation came on June 22, 168 BCE, on the plain of Pydna, near the modern city of Katerini. Perseus had positioned his army, numbering around 40,000 men, on favourable ground, with his elite phalanx at the centre. The Macedonian phalanx, 20,000 strong, bristled with their 18-foot sarissas, an awe-inspiring sight, seemingly an impenetrable wall of steel. Paulus's Roman legions, approximately 38,000 strong, advanced across the plain, arrayed in their flexible manipuli formations, augmented by allied Italian and Greek contingents. The battle commenced in the late afternoon. For a terrifying hour, the Macedonian phalanx advanced, its pikes driving back the Roman front lines, threatening to break through. The sheer weight and coordinated thrust of the sarissas were devastating, impaling legionaries, their bronze shields no match for the spear forest. Paulus himself, a seasoned veteran, later admitted to being struck with fear at the sight of the phalanx in full charge. The Roman line wavered, appearing on the verge of collapse. However, the rigid nature of the phalanx, its greatest strength, was also its fatal weakness. As the Macedonian phalanx surged forward, it inevitably lost cohesion on the uneven ground, and as it passed over some hills and rough patches that littered the battlefield, gaps, tiny at first, began to appear in the tightly packed ranks. This was the moment the Roman legionary system was designed for. Unlike the phalanx, which operated as a single, massive unit, the Roman manipuli could operate independently, exploiting weaknesses, turning flanks, and engaging in individual combat. Roman legionaries, often discarding their shorter swords, gladius, and large shields, scutum, and even their javelins, pilum after their initial use, squeezed into these newly created gaps, turning their short stabbing swords into fearsome close-quarter weapons. Once inside the pike wall, the phalanx lost its advantage. The sarissas, too long for close combat, became useless, even a hindrance. The Macedonians, trained to fight as a cohesive unit, were suddenly forced into individual duels they were ill-equipped to win against the highly skilled, heavily armoured Roman legionaries. The fighting became a desperate, bloody melee, a swirling vortex of steel. Meanwhile, Paulus, utilising his cavalry and allied infantry, launched flanking attacks. Perseus's flanks, exposed by the overextension of his phalanx, collapsed. The Macedonian cavalry, after a brief ineffective charge, fled the field, abandoning their king. The phalanx, now surrounded and under attack from all sides, its lines broken, dissolved into a chaotic rout. The slaughter was horrific. Over 20,000 Macedonian soldiers were killed, and thousands more captured. Perseus himself, seeing the utter annihilation of his army, fled, seeking refuge in Samothrace, but was eventually betrayed and captured by the Romans. The defeat of Perseus at Pydna was not just another victory, it was the definitive end of the last great Macedonian kingdom, a power that had dominated the Hellenic world for centuries. Macedon was shattered, its royal line extinguished, its military might utterly broken. The kingdom was divided into four nominally independent but heavily controlled Roman client republics, prohibited from trade with each other or from maintaining significant armies. Their precious gold and silver mines were immediately seized by Rome, and their arsenals emptied. This left Greece vulnerable and exposed, stripped of its traditional, albeit often oppressive, counterweight to external powers. The illusion of balance, however tenuous, was gone. Rome was now the sole, undisputed arbiter of Greek affairs. The period of liberation had effectively ended, replaced by an overt, though still indirect, form of dominion. The once proud Hellenic city-states, now without a major Hellenistic king to play off against Rome, were left entirely at the mercy of the Republic's policies, their cries for Eleutheria increasingly hollow. The defeat of Perseus at Pydna thus marked a critical juncture. It ensured that the next time Rome intervened in Greece, it would be with the unbridled fury of a master asserting absolute control, paving the way for the inevitable and crushing final act of annexation. The devastating victory at Pydna in 168 BCE had, with a single, brutal stroke, shattered the last great Macedonian kingdom, leaving Greece not just vulnerable, but utterly exposed. The Antigonid dynasty, which for centuries had defined the geopolitical landscape of the Hellenic world, was now extinguished. Perseus, the last king, languished in Roman captivity, eventually perishing in an Italian prison. In the wake of this triumph, Rome adopted a policy calculated to prevent any future resurgence of Macedonian power. The kingdom was not annexed directly, but carved into four independent republics, deliberately weakened, prohibited from intermarriage or trade, and forbidden from maintaining standing armies. This created a fractured, easily manageable client region, utterly subservient to Rome. However, Rome's victory over Macedon also triggered a period of increasingly harsh and often arbitrary interventions in the affairs of the Greek city-states and leagues. The era of the benevolent liberator had decisively ended. No longer was there a powerful Macedonian king for the Greeks to play off against Rome. No longer could they appeal to another major Hellenistic power for balance. Rome, now the undisputed hegemon of the eastern Mediterranean, felt emboldened to impose its will with little pretense of Eleutheria. Any flicker of independent spirit, any sign of defiance was met with swift and disproportionate Roman reprisal. The Achaean League, once Rome's staunchest ally against Philip V, now found itself the primary target of Roman suspicion and resentment. Its strength and federal organisation, once useful, were now viewed as a potential threat to Roman dominance. Following Pydna, Rome instigated a massive purge of anti-Roman elements across Greece. Over 1,000 prominent Achaean citizens, including the historian Polybius, were deported to Italy as hostages, held without trial for 17 years, a clear message of intimidation. This mass detention profoundly impacted the Achaean political landscape, removing a generation of leaders and breeding deep-seated bitterness. For 2 decades after Pydna, Greece simmered with resentment. Roman envoys and commissioners repeatedly meddled in internal Greek disputes, always favouring factions that were overtly pro-Roman, suppressing any glimmer of independent action. The Achaean League, feeling increasingly suffocated, found itself drawn into a series of intractable territorial disputes, particularly with Sparta and the city of Oropus, matters that Rome continuously exploited to weaken the League's authority. Rome's solutions often meant fragmenting the League or stripping it of power, chipping away at its federal structure. The breaking point came in the mid-1400s BCE. An adventurer named Andriscus, claiming to be a son of Perseus and calling himself Philip VI, ignited a rebellion in Macedon. For a brief, terrifying period, he successfully rallied the Macedonians and even defeated some Roman forces, restoring the phantom of Antigonid rule. This was a direct affront to Rome's authority, a reignition of the Macedonian problem that Rome had believed solved. Quintus Caecilius Metellus. Macedonicus was dispatched with a powerful Roman army, and in 148 BCE, Andriscus was decisively defeated and captured. This time, Rome's patience was at an end. Macedon was formally annexed, becoming the Roman province of Macedonia, a chilling precedent for the rest of Greece. Meanwhile, the Achaean League, under the leadership of a fiercely nationalist strategist named Diaeus, seized upon the opportunity presented by Andriscus's revolt to assert its own independence, or at least its right to settle its own disputes without Roman interference. The League defied Roman edicts concerning Sparta and Oropus, then, with a desperate surge of patriotism, declared war on Sparta. When Metellus, now campaigning in Macedon, ordered the League to disband and threatened them with the full might of Rome, the Achaeans, inflamed by anti-Roman rhetoric and a misguided sense of their own military capabilities, refused. They prepared for war, mobilizing a hastily assembled force of citizens and slaves, a desperate gamble against the mightiest power in the Mediterranean. The Senate in Rome, weary of incessant Greek recalcitrance and viewing the Achaean defiance as a challenge to its very supremacy, decided to make an example. A new proconsul, Lucius Mummius Achaicus, a man of simple origins but ruthless military efficiency, was dispatched with a massive army to extinguish the last vestiges of Greek independence. Mummius was a commander of a different mould than Flaminius. He had no pretense of Hellenophilia, only a cold, efficient determination to enforce Roman will. Metellus, ever the disciplinarian, initially tried to mediate with the Achaeans, warning them of the futility of their struggle, but his efforts were rebuffed by the inflamed League leaders. The Achaean general Critolaus, leading a desperate force, clashed with Metellus's legions in Thessaly, near Thermopylae, once again a site of ill-fated Greek stands. The Achaean army was utterly annihilated. Critolaus himself perished, likely by drowning in a swamp during the rout. The remnants of the Achaean forces, now under the command of Diaeus, retreated south towards the Peloponnese, attempting to rally a final defence at Corinth. Corinth, one of the wealthiest and most historically significant cities of ancient Greece, stood on the strategic isthmus that controlled trade between the Aegean and Adriatic. It was a city of immense cultural heritage, famed for its artistic craftsmanship, its vibrant commerce, and its association with the Isthmian Games, the very site where Flaminius had declared Greek freedom. In 146 BCE, Mummius's legions, having advanced unimpeded through central Greece, arrived at the gates of Corinth. Dias had fortified the city and gathered a mixed force, largely composed of freed slaves and desperate citizens, numbering perhaps 20,000 men. This was a force wholly inadequate to challenge the disciplined, battle-hardened Roman legions. The final battle was a brutal, one-sided affair. Mummius ordered a full assault. The Roman heavy infantry, forming their impenetrable testudo, breached the walls. The Achaean forces, though fighting with a desperate courage born of despair, were no match. They were cut down in droves. Dias, seeing the utter collapse of his forces and the impending doom of his city, committed suicide. What followed was an act of brutal, calculated destruction, designed to serve as a stark, unforgettable warning to the entire Hellenic world. Rome unleashed its full wrath, obliterating Corinth. Mummius, under specific orders from the Senate, ordered the city utterly razed. Every man was put to the sword. Women and children were sold into slavery. Its magnificent public buildings, its temples, its houses, all were systematically torn down or burned to the ground. The very stones of the city, once a testament to Greek ingenuity and prosperity, were scattered and broken. The priceless artworks, the exquisite statues, the renowned Corinthian bronzes were either carried off as war booty to adorn Roman villas and temples, or, in a shocking display of cultural ignorance, were shattered and destroyed. Polybius famously recounted Mummius's soldiers using exquisite paintings as gaming boards, oblivious to their artistic value. The destruction of Corinth sent a shiver of terror throughout Greece and the broader Hellenistic world. It was an unprecedented act, a brutal punctuation mark on centuries of Greek independence. The once proud city, a symbol of Hellenic commerce and artistry, ceased to exist. Its strategic location remained, but as a desolate wasteland, a silent monument to Roman vengeance. This act, more than any other, extinguished Greece's political independence with fire and sword. Following the destruction of Corinth, Mummius, acting under senatorial decree, systematically dissolved all Greek leagues, including the Achaean. Cities that had opposed Rome were subjected to crushing indemnities, had their walls torn down, and their citizens disarmed. Others that had remained loyal were allowed a semblance of local autonomy, but their foreign policy, their military and their economic affairs were now firmly under Roman oversight. The land was surveyed, taxes were imposed, and Roman governors and administrators were established. Greece was no longer a collection of free states under Roman protection. It was a conquered territory, its destiny no longer subtly bound, but irrevocably chained. The stage was now set for the formal reorganization of this ancient land into Roman provinces, its glorious past giving way to the stark reality of imperial administration. The smoke still curled over the desolate ruins of Corinth, a stark and chilling monument to Roman wrath. Its obliteration in 146 BCE sent shockwaves of terror and resignation throughout the Hellenic world. The era of freedom, however illusory, was definitively over. What had once been a complex tapestry of independent city-states, federal leagues, and client kingdoms, all nominally under Roman protection but still possessing a degree of self-determination, was now a conquered land. The time for subtlety and diplomatic manoeuvre had passed. Rome had proven its absolute supremacy with fire and sword. The next phase was the systematic incorporation of Greece into the vast, burgeoning Roman Imperium, a reorganization that would transform its ancient city-states into mere administrative units under a distant master. Immediately following the destruction of Corinth, Lucius Mummius Achaicus, the victorious general, was tasked not merely with conquest but with establishing the new Roman order. Accompanying him was a commission of 10 senators, dispatched from Rome with the explicit mandate to oversee the administrative reorganization of Greece. Their work was thorough, precise, and uncompromising, designed to erase any lingering hope of genuine independence and to integrate the conquered territories into the Roman system of governance. This settlement, sometimes referred to as the Lex Rupilia, though not a formal law of that name, but rather a series of senatorial decrees and edicts, laid the foundation for centuries of Roman rule. The first, and perhaps most significant administrative change, was the formalization of Roman provincial control. Macedon, which had been subdued and split into 4 client republics after Pydna, was now fully absorbed. In 146 BCE, it was formally declared the Roman province of Macedonia. This vast new province encompassed not only the former kingdom of Macedon, but also Epirus and parts of Illyria and Thessaly, extending Rome's direct rule deep into the Balkan Peninsula. A Roman proconsul, initially based at Thessalonica, would govern this strategically vital region, overseeing its economic exploitation, collecting taxes, and commanding the legions stationed there to guard against incursions from the warlike Thracian tribes to the north. For the rest of mainland Greece, the Peloponnese, central Greece and southern Thessaly, a different, though equally subjugating arrangement was devised. This territory, the ancient heartland of Hellenic civilization, was not immediately declared a separate province. Instead, it was formally subjected to the jurisdiction of the governor of Macedonia. Thus, what would later become the province of Achaia was, in essence, a sub-province or a dependency administered by the Macedonian governor. This arrangement served multiple Roman objectives. It allowed for a leaner administrative structure, prevented the creation of a potentially powerful independent Greek provincial government, and underscored the direct connection between Greek subjugation and Macedonian defeat. The iconic Greek leagues, the Achaean and Aetolian, which had once been vibrant expressions of federal autonomy, were permanently dissolved. Their federal structures, once a source of strength and cohesion, were now seen as dangerous breeding grounds for anti-Roman sentiment. Their assemblies, their federal armies, their common treasuries, all were abolished. This act fragmented Greece politically, ensuring that no unified Greek entity could ever again challenge Roman authority. Instead, each individual city-state was relegated to its own, isolated relationship with the Roman governor, effectively atomizing Greek power. The internal governance of these myriad city-states was also reshaped to serve Roman interests. Democratic constitutions, particularly in cities that had sided against Rome, were largely suppressed and replaced with oligarchic rule. Councils of wealthy pro-Roman elites, known as decemprimi or gynesi in some areas, were established to manage local affairs, ensuring that Roman directives were followed and Roman taxes collected efficiently. These oligarchs, whose power depended entirely on Roman patronage, became instruments of imperial control, further widening the gap between the ruling class and the common citizenry. The ancient Greek ideal of direct citizen participation in governance, a hallmark of their celebrated political experiments, was now systematically dismantled, replaced by a system designed for stability and obedience. Economic restructuring was another pillar of the Roman reorganization. The most immediate impact was the imposition of tribute and taxes. The fertile plains of Thessaly, the olive groves of Attica, the vineyards of the Peloponnese, all were now compelled to contribute a portion of their produce or wealth to the Roman treasury. Roman tax collectors, often publicani, private contractors who purchased the rights to collect taxes, descended upon Greece, their methods often notoriously rapacious. This new economic burden, combined with the loss of local economic autonomy and the disruption of traditional trade routes focused towards Rome's interests, contributed to widespread economic hardship in many areas, particularly in the immediate aftermath of the conquest. Crucially, the destruction of Corinth had dealt a devastating blow to Greek commerce. Corinth had been a vital entrepot, a bustling hub for trade between East and West. Its obliteration, and the subsequent suppression of other commercial centres that had resisted Rome, created an economic vacuum. While some Roman policies initially restricted certain aspects of Greek trade, eventually Greek markets were fully integrated into the vast Roman economic network, but on terms dictated by Rome. This meant that Greek resources, whether agricultural produce, skilled craftsmanship, or even intellectual talent, were now channeled to serve Roman imperial ambitions. The legal landscape of Greece was also irrevocably altered. Roman law became supreme, superseding local legal traditions where conflicts arose. While local courts continued to handle minor disputes according to Greek custom, serious cases, especially those involving Roman citizens or significant property, fell under the jurisdiction of the Roman governor. Greek citizens, no matter how distinguished, now had to appeal to Roman authorities, underscoring their diminished status. Roman citizens, by contrast, enjoyed superior legal protections and privileges, creating a stark hierarchy within the conquered territories. The transition was not without its discontents. Sporadic, localized revolts, often fueled by economic hardship or nationalist sentiment, flared up in various parts of Greece in the decades following Mummius' settlement. These, however, were brutally and swiftly suppressed by the Roman legions garrisoned in Macedonia. There was no longer any major power to rally behind, no external ally to offer support. The Greeks, fractured and disarmed, lacked the military capacity to challenge Rome. Adaptation, often accompanied by quiet despair, became the prevailing sentiment. By the end of the 2nd century BCE, Greece was a land transformed. Its ancient glory remained in its magnificent ruins and its enduring cultural heritage, but its political and military independence was thoroughly extinguished. Its city-states, once proud and autonomous, were now mere administrative units, their destinies dictated by the decrees of a Roman Senate and the will of a Roman governor. The vibrant political experiments that had given birth to democracy and philosophy were over, replaced by the rigid structure of imperial administration. Greece, the cradle of Western civilization, had become a province, irrevocably integrated into the Roman world, its future now inextricably bound to the fate of its conqueror. The formal reorganization of Greece into Roman provinces, with its ancient city-states reduced to mere administrative units, did not instantly usher in an era of tranquil obedience. The proud spirit of Hellenic Eleutheria, though politically extinguished by the brutal sack of Corinth and the dissolution of the leagues, continued to flicker, igniting sporadic and desperate acts of resistance. For decades after 146 BCE, Rome faced the challenge of consolidating its dominion, a process that demanded constant vigilance and often ruthless suppression. The Greek people, accustomed to centuries of autonomy and fierce independence, found adaptation to their new status as subjects of a distant, often rapacious master a bitter pill to swallow. The immediate aftermath of the conquest was marked by widespread economic distress and social disruption. The publicani, Roman tax farmers, descended upon the ravaged lands of Greece like vultures, demanding tribute with little regard for the local economy or the recent devastation of war. Their methods were often extortionate, leading to widespread debt and land dispossession among the Greek peasantry. Many Greek cities, burdened by immense war indemnities and stripped of their treasuries, struggled to maintain their public infrastructure or civic life. The loss of autonomy in trade, with Roman interests now dictating commercial flow, further exacerbated the economic hardship. This fertile ground of discontent provided ample fuel for local uprisings. These acts of resistance, however, were fundamentally different from the grand campaigns against Macedon or the Seleucids. There were no kings to rally behind, no powerful armies to confront the legions in open battle. Instead, Greek resistance took the form of localized revolts, banditry, and occasional desperate attempts by charismatic figures to rekindle the flame of independence. These were often spontaneous outbursts, fueled by hunger, resentment, or a fervent, if futile, sense of patriotism. One significant challenge came from the sheer geographical nature of Greece itself. The rugged, mountainous terrain of the Peloponnese, Aetolia, and Epirus had long been a sanctuary for independent-minded communities and outlaws. Brigandage, a perennial problem in the region, intensified in the aftermath of Roman conquest. Displaced soldiers, ruined farmers, and those simply unwilling to submit to Roman rule often took to the hills, forming bands that preyed on Roman officials, tax collectors, and pro-Roman elites. These groups, while rarely posing a strategic threat to Roman control, were a persistent nuisance, disrupting trade routes and forcing Rome to maintain garrisons in difficult, remote areas. The suppression of these localized revolts often fell to the Roman proconsul of Macedonia, whose broad jurisdiction encompassed the subdued Greek heartland. These governors, with the full backing of Roman legions, responded with swift and brutal efficiency. Rebellious villages were razed, brigand chiefs crucified, and entire regions pacified through a combination of military force and economic incentives. The message was clear. Any challenge to Roman authority, no matter how small or localized, would be met with overwhelming force. Beyond direct military resistance, there was a more subtle, yet equally potent form of Greek recalcitrance: cultural and intellectual defiance. While many educated Greeks quickly recognized the futility of armed struggle, They often maintained a quiet pride in their Hellenic identity and cultural superiority. This manifested in various ways: a staunch adherence to Greek language, customs, and religious practices, a subtle disdain for Roman barbarity and lack of intellectual refinement, and a continued emphasis on their glorious past. This intellectual resistance, while not directly threatening Roman rule, created a cultural barrier that Rome would eventually seek to overcome not through force, but through absorption. One of the most profound examples of armed resistance, albeit brief, occurred decades after the initial conquest, during the cataclysmic Mithridatic Wars in the early 1st century BCE. Mithridates VI Eupator, the brilliant and ambitious king of Pontus, rose to challenge Roman supremacy in Asia Minor, portraying himself as a liberator of the Greeks from Roman oppression. In 88 BCE, he instigated the infamous Adriatic Vespers, a mass slaughter of Roman citizens and Italian residents across Asia Minor. This act, unthinkable just a few decades earlier, resonated deeply with many Greeks who harboured bitter memories of Roman rapacity. When Mithridates' general Archelaus landed in Greece, many cities, feeling the heavy hand of Roman provincial administration and suffering under the yoke of unscrupulous tax farmers, eagerly threw off their Roman allegiances. Athens, in particular, a city with a rich democratic tradition and a lingering sense of its own importance, joined the revolt. Under the leadership of the philosopher Athenian, Athens briefly reasserted its independence, expelling Roman residents and declaring for Mithridates. Other cities in the Peloponnese and central Greece, seeing an opportunity for genuine Eleutheria, also defected. This was the most widespread act of Greek defiance since Corinth, a desperate gamble for liberation under a new, albeit Eastern, patron. Rome's response was swift and merciless. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, one of Rome's most ruthless and effective generals, was dispatched to Greece. In 87 BCE, Sulla laid siege to Athens, a prolonged and brutal undertaking. The city, fortified by its ancient walls and defended by a desperate populace, held out for months. Sulla's legions, starved and frustrated, resorted to tearing down sections of the revered long walls, using the timber to construct siege engines. Finally, in 86 BCE, Sulla's forces breached the Athenian defences. What followed was a massacre. Sulla ordered his legions to show no quarter, and thousands of Athenians were slaughtered in the streets. He allowed his soldiers to plunder the city, stripping it of vast quantities of its artistic treasures, further emptying its coffers. While Sulla spared Athens from complete destruction, he imposed crushing fines and dissolved its remaining semblance of self-governance, ensuring that the city would never again pose a challenge to Roman authority. Sulla then turned his attention to the rest of Greece, systematically crushing any remaining pro-Mithridatic forces. The Battle of Chaeronea, 86 BCE, and Orchomenus, 85 BCE, saw Sulla's legions decisively defeat Mithridatic armies, inflicting massive casualties and effectively expelling the Pontic king from Greece. The Greek cities that had sided with Mithridates were severely punished, subjected to heavy indemnities, and deprived of any remaining privileges. Sulla's campaign, while restoring Roman authority, left Greece even more devastated and impoverished than it had been after Mummius's conquest. By the middle of the 1st century BCE, sporadic Greek resistance had effectively succumbed to overwhelming force. The crushing defeats at Corinth and later Athens under Sulla had taught the Greeks a bitter lesson. Resistance was futile and only invited catastrophic reprisal. The only viable path forward was adaptation. This meant, for many, abandoning any hope of political independence and instead focusing on preserving their cultural identity, their philosophical traditions, and their local civic life within the confines of Roman rule. The choices confronting the Greeks were stark: overt rebellion, leading to destruction and enslavement; quiet, simmering resentment that could erupt in localized banditry or ineffective protest; or pragmatic adaptation, a decision to navigate the new reality of Roman dominion, seeking patronage, trade, and even opportunities for advancement within the vast Roman system. Most chose the latter, recognizing that while political Eleutheria was gone, a different kind of survival, a cultural endurance, was still possible. The seeds of despair may have been sown, but so too were the roots of a profound cultural absorption that would ultimately see Greece, though politically subjugated, exert an enduring influence over its conquerors. The stage was now set for this fascinating complex exchange where the vanquished would, in many ways, conquer their victors. The final, brutal suppression of Greek resistance, culminating in Sulla's savage sack of Athens in 86 BCE, had silenced the last organised defiance against Rome. Greece, now firmly under Roman provincial administration, its city-states' mere administrative units, had succumbed to overwhelming military force. Yet, even as Rome asserted its unyielding political and military dominion, a profound and ironic reversal was quietly unfolding. The very victors, initially dismissive of Greek political weakness and often contemptuous of their perceived decadence, found themselves increasingly, irrevocably, in awe of Hellenic culture. They began to absorb Greek arts, philosophy and language with an insatiable appetite, becoming culturally captivated by the very people they had subjugated. This was the moment of Graecia capta ferum victorum cepit. Captive Greece took captive her fierce conqueror. The process of cultural absorption was multifaceted and began long before the final annexation of Greece. Early Roman exposure to Greek culture came through the Magna Graecia, the Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily. Cities like Tarentum, Syracuse and Cumae were vibrant centres of Hellenic art, literature and philosophy. Roman generals and officials encountering these sophisticated societies during their conquests in Italy developed a nascent appreciation for Hellenic refinement. Figures like the elder Cato, despite his staunch Roman traditionalism, was forced to learn Greek and witnessed firsthand the intellectual vibrancy of Greek thought, even if he railed against its perceived corrupting influence on Roman youth. But the real floodgates opened after the Macedonian and Seleucid wars. With each successive victory, waves of Greek spoils poured into Rome, not just gold and silver, but thousands of exquisite statues, paintings, bronzes, and priceless manuscripts. Lucius Aemilius Paulus, after his triumph at Pydna, returned to Rome not only with vast sums of money, but with an unprecedented collection of Greek artworks. Public porticos and private villas were adorned with masterpieces by Praxiteles, Lysippus, and Phidias. These works, stripped from temples and public spaces in Greece, transformed the aesthetic landscape of Rome. The city, once largely functional in its architecture and art, now aspired to Greek elegance and grace. Roman sculptors began to emulate Greek forms, initially with direct copies, then with their own interpretations, fusing Roman realism with Hellenic idealism. More profoundly, the human spoils of war played a crucial role. Thousands of educated Greeks, enslaved during the conquests or deported as hostages, like Polybius, whose intimate observations of Roman society were invaluable, found themselves in Roman households. These Greculi, as they were sometimes dismissively called, became tutors for aristocratic Roman children, teaching them Greek, rhetoric, philosophy and mathematics. They served as scribes, librarians, doctors, architects and artists. The Scipio family, particularly Scipio Africanus, was famous for its Hellenized household, fostering a generation of Roman intellectuals steeped in Greek learning. The young Roman aristocrat, taught Greek from infancy, effectively became bilingual, with Greek often serving as the language of intellectual discourse, poetry and philosophy. Roman elites, now masters of the Mediterranean, began to embark on grand tours of Greece, particularly to Athens, Rhodes and Alexandria, to complete their education. These were not mere pleasure trips, but pilgrimages to the intellectual founts of the world. Young Romans like Cicero, before his meteoric rise as an orator and statesman, studied rhetoric and philosophy in Athens, immersing himself in the Stoic, Epicurean and academic schools. They listened to lectures, debated with renowned philosophers, and walked in the footsteps of Socrates and Plato. The gymnasium and the lyceum were no longer just names in books. They were living institutions where Roman youth honed their minds. This immersion led to a profound absorption of Greek literary and philosophical traditions. Early Roman literature, particularly drama, was heavily indebted to Greek models. Livius Andronicus, a Greek freedman, translated Homer's Odyssey into Latin, effectively introducing epic poetry to Roman audiences. Playwrights like Plautus and Terence freely adapted Greek New Comedy, transforming Hellenistic plots and characters into Latin equivalents that resonated with Roman sensibilities. Later, poets like Virgil and Horace, though writing in Latin, drew deeply from Greek epic and lyric traditions, imbuing their works with Hellenic mythological themes, poetic forms, and philosophical undertones. Horace's odes, with their Sapphic and Alcaic stanzas, are direct heirs to Greek lyric poetry. Greek philosophy, particularly Stoicism and Epicureanism, found fertile ground in Rome. Stoicism, with its emphasis on virtue, duty, self-control and resilience in the face of adversity, resonated deeply with traditional Roman values of virtues and gravitas. Figures like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, though the latter two were ethnically Greek, they wrote in Greek within a Roman imperial context, would become celebrated Stoic philosophers, profoundly influencing Roman ethics and political thought. Epicureanism, though often misunderstood and caricatured by Roman moralists, also attracted a significant following, offering a path to tranquility through the pursuit of pleasure, interpreted as absence of pain and mental serenity. The Greek language itself became a marker of education and sophistication in Rome. While Latin remained the language of government, law, and the military in the West, Greek became the lingua franca of the Eastern Empire and the language of high culture and intellectual exchange across the entire Roman world. A well-educated Roman was expected to be fluent in both. Correspondence between Roman elites often switched seamlessly between Latin and Greek, and many Roman authors, like the historian Cassius Dio, chose to write entirely in Greek. Medical texts, scientific treatises, and mathematical works were almost exclusively in Greek. Even Roman religion, initially distinct, began to absorb Greek influences. Greek deities were often identified with their Roman counterparts, Zeus with Jupiter, Hera with Juno, Ares with Mars, and Greek mythological narratives became part of the Roman cultural fabric. The Sibylline books, consulted in times of crisis, were written in Greek. Mystery cults and philosophical schools from the East, often with strong Greek roots, gained popularity among Roman citizens, offering personal spiritual experiences beyond the austere public rituals of traditional Roman religion. This cultural captivation was not a passive reception. It was an active process of assimilation and adaptation. Rome did not merely copy, it synthesized. Roman culture, though deeply Hellenized, retained its distinct identity. The practical, legalistic and militaristic spirit of Rome gave a unique cast to the Greek forms it adopted. Greek architectural orders were employed in grand Roman structures, but for distinctly Roman purposes like amphitheatres and massive aqueducts. Greek philosophical ideas were often reinterpreted through a pragmatic Roman lens, focusing on their applicability to public service and the ethical conduct of a citizen. By the Augustan age, the Hellenization of Roman culture was complete. Augustus himself, the first Roman emperor, understood the power of Greek imagery and architectural forms in projecting imperial authority and cultural prestige. His rebuilding of Rome saw the widespread adoption of Greek marble architecture, transforming the brick city into a monument worthy of its Hellenized empire. Poets like Virgil and Livy, under imperial patronage, crafted Latin literary masterpieces that consciously engaged with and transcended their Greek predecessors, creating a distinctly Roman cultural identity that was, paradoxically, deeply indebted to Greece. Thus, the Roman victors, in their quest for imperial dominion, had unwittingly opened themselves to a conquest of a different kind. The political and military independence of Greece was extinguished, its people subjugated, but its vibrant, enduring culture flowed like a river into Rome, enriching, shaping, and ultimately defining the civilization of its conqueror. The Hellenic legacy, far from being extinguished, became the very bedrock upon which the Roman Empire built its cultural edifice, ensuring its eternal presence in the heart of Western civilization. The cultural captivation of Rome by Hellenic arts and philosophy was a profound, almost paradoxical development in the wake of conquest. Yet beneath the gleaming marble and the elegant Greek phrases now adopted by Roman elites lay the stark, often brutal reality of economic dominion. Greece, once a vibrant commercial nexus and a source of considerable wealth, found its trade routes and resources systematically reshaped to serve Roman imperial ambitions, a process that brought both new Roman-centric prosperity and, for many, increased exploitation. The immediate aftermath of the Roman conquest in 146 BCE, and especially the punitive campaigns of Sulla in the early 1st century BCE, plunged Greece into severe economic distress. The obliteration of Corinth, a vital trade hub that linked the Aegean with the Adriatic, dealt a catastrophic blow to inter-Hellenic commerce. Its destruction left a gaping wound in the economic heart of Greece, disrupting established patterns of trade and severing critical links for goods flowing between east and west. Other cities that resisted Rome also suffered punitive fines, confiscation of property, and the forced sale of their citizens into slavery, draining the region of both wealth and productive labour. The most immediate and pervasive form of exploitation was the imposition of heavy tribute and taxes. The Roman Republic, ever in need of funds to finance its endless wars and burgeoning administration, viewed conquered territories primarily as sources of revenue. Greece, now a dependency of the province of Macedonia, and later the province of Achaia, was subjected to a system of taxation that often proved ruinous. Roman publicani, private contractors who bid for the right to collect taxes in a given province, descended upon Greece like locusts. These individuals or syndicates were notorious for their rapacious methods, often collecting far more than the official Roman levy, pocketing the difference, and enforcing their demands with the threat of Roman legions. This system disproportionately affected the Greek peasantry and small landowners. Land taxes, customs duties, and various other levies drained their meagre resources, forcing many into debt and eventual land dispossession. Rich agricultural lands, particularly the fertile plains of Thessaly and the olive groves of Attica, were rigorously taxed. The once bustling ports and markets, though eventually rebuilt, now saw their commercial activities funneled towards Roman interests. Greek merchants, facing stiff competition from Roman traders and burdened by Roman regulations, found their traditional markets shrinking or reoriented. Beyond direct taxation, Rome extracted immense wealth through war booty and the systematic looting of art. The treasures of Greece, accumulated over centuries, filled Roman storehouses and adorned Roman villas. While this was a cultural transfer that captivated Rome, for Greece it was a devastating loss of national heritage and a material depletion of its resources. The trophies of war were not just military standards, but priceless sculptures, paintings and bronzes which had once graced public spaces and temples. Sulla's campaigns, in particular, left Athens and other cities utterly stripped of their artistic wealth. However, the picture was not one of unmitigated decline. As the chaos of conquest subsided, and Greece was fully integrated into the vast unified Roman Empire, especially after the establishment of the Principate under Augustus, a new kind of prosperity emerged, albeit one firmly rooted in Roman imperial needs. The Pax Romana, the long period of relative peace and stability enforced by Roman legions, gradually brought an end to the incessant internal squabbles and localized wars that had plagued Greece for centuries. This newfound security was a boon for commerce and agriculture. Rome also invested in infrastructure that, while primarily serving its own strategic and administrative needs, also facilitated Greek trade. Roman roads crisscrossed the peninsula, connecting previously isolated regions and making the transport of goods more efficient. New ports were developed, and existing ones improved, to handle the increasing volume of imperial trade. The Roman fleet policing the Mediterranean against piracy, a problem Rome had used as its initial pretext for intervention, made sea lanes safer than they had been in generations. Greek resources were now exploited for the benefit of the wider Roman Empire. High-quality Greek marble from quarries like Pentelicon and Paros was shipped to Rome to adorn imperial buildings and private mansions, contributing to the grandeur of the capital. Fine Greek wines, olives, and olive oil found new markets across the Roman world. Skilled Greek craftsmen, artisans, jewelers, potters, and sculptors were sought after throughout the empire, some migrating to Rome or other imperial centres, others producing goods for export. The famous Corinthian bronze, even after the city's destruction, saw a revival in production from new workshops catering to Roman tastes. The reshaping of trade routes meant a shift in orientation. Instead of flowing primarily within the Hellenistic world, Greek products and raw materials increasingly flowed westward, towards Rome and its burgeoning Italian markets. Similarly, Roman goods, including manufactured items, foodstuffs, and luxury goods from other parts of the empire, flowed into Greece. This integration, while bringing access to a vast imperial market, also meant that Greece became more of a producer for the empire than an independent commercial power dictating its own trade terms. For the Greek elites who adapted to Roman rule, there were significant opportunities. Collaboration with Roman authorities, acting as local administrators, tax collectors, or intermediaries, could lead to considerable personal wealth and influence. Wealthy landowners, by shifting their agricultural production to meet Roman demand, could thrive. Many Greek merchants found success by integrating into Roman commercial networks, forming partnerships with Roman businessmen or supplying goods to the Roman military. The Roman presence also brought a new influx of capital from Roman investors and land speculators who saw opportunities in the fertile lands and strategic locations of Greece. However, this prosperity was often unevenly distributed. While some cities, particularly Athens, which received significant Roman patronage and investment in the imperial period, and the rebuilt Corinth, were founded as a Roman colony by Julius Caesar in 44 BCE and swiftly regaining its commercial prominence as a Roman city, experienced revivals. Many rural areas and smaller towns continued to struggle under the weight of taxation and the demands of large Roman landholders. The Ager Publicus, public land often seized after conquest, became the property of the Roman state and could be leased to wealthy Roman or Greek elites, further concentrating land ownership. Ultimately, the Greek economy was transformed from an independent dynamic system into a component part of the Roman imperial machine. It was a supplier of raw materials, agricultural products, and skilled labour, and a consumer of Roman goods. The glory of its independent commercial past, where cities like Athens and Corinth had built vast thalassocracies, was gone. Yet the sheer scale and stability of the Roman Empire allowed for a degree of economic recovery and integration that, while not truly free, provided a framework for a new, albeit dependent, existence. Greece, though politically a shadow of its former self, played a vital role in the economic lifeblood of the Roman East, its resources harnessed to fuel the ambitions and maintain the grandeur of its conqueror. Even as Roman legions enforced order and publicani extracted tribute, a different kind of power persisted in Greece, one immune to the thrust of the gladius or the dictates of the Senate. The intellectual fire of Hellas, far from being extinguished by conquest, burned brighter under the long peace of Rome, transforming its ancient centres of learning into indispensable wellsprings of imperial thought. Athens, above all, the very cradle of philosophy and rhetoric, thrived under Roman patronage, its wisdom becoming the bedrock upon which Roman governance, ethics, and education would increasingly rest. The sack of Athens by Sulla in 86 BCE, though a brutal episode, had been a temporary rupture, not an annihilation of its intellectual life. Sulla, despite his savagery, was a man of culture who revered Athens's philosophical traditions, even dedicating a portion of the city's recovered treasures to the rebuilding of its academic institutions. This pattern, Roman military might, followed by cultural veneration and investment, would define the relationship between the conqueror and its intellectual fount. As the Republic gave way to the Empire and the Pax Romana settled over the Mediterranean, Athens was strategically positioned not as a political capital, but as the world's premier university city, a living museum and intellectual laboratory. The four great philosophical schools, the Academy, Platonic, the Lyceum, Peripatetic, the Stoa, Stoic, and the Garden, Epicurean, though diminished from their classical peaks, experienced a significant revival under Roman rule. Roman elites, recognizing the prestige and profundity of Greek thought, actively funded these institutions. Wealthy Roman senators, emperors, and private citizens endowed chairs, built libraries, and provided stipends for Greek philosophers and rhetoricians. The city became a magnet for ambitious Roman youth, an essential stop on the cursus honorum of intellectual development. It was said that no Roman could truly be considered educated without having studied in Athens. Imagine a young Roman aristocrat, perhaps a future consul or emperor, arriving in Piraeus, the port of Athens. He would traverse the sacred way, passing the remnants of ancient glory, before immersing himself in the bustling intellectual quarter. His days would be spent in the sun-dappled porticos of the Stoa, listening to the rigorous dialectic of Stoic masters like Musonius Rufus or Epictetus. Though the latter taught in Nicopolis, his influence resonated throughout Roman Athens, grappling with concepts of virtues, officium, duty, and rational self-control. He might then retire to the tranquil gardens of the Epicureans, debating the nature of pleasure and the path to ataraxia, freedom from disturbance. Or he could engage with the intricate logic of the Platonists in the Academy, or the Peripatetics in the Lyceum, mastering the art of reasoned argument and ethical inquiry. The appeal of Greek philosophy to Romans was immense. Stoicism in particular, with its emphasis on cosmic order, moral duty and emotional resilience in the face of fate, resonated deeply with traditional Roman values of pietas, gravitas, and constantia. It offered a robust ethical framework for governing a vast empire, for enduring political reversals, and for maintaining personal integrity amidst the temptations of power. Roman emperors like Marcus Aurelius, a devout Stoic, famously penned his Meditations in Greek, drawing directly from this Athenian intellectual tradition to guide his immense responsibilities. Figures like Seneca the Younger, the tutor and advisor to Nero, used Stoic principles to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial court life. Even when they diverged, Roman intellectuals constantly engaged with Greek thought, adapting it, Latinizing it, and making it their own. Rhetoric, the art of persuasive speech, was another Greek discipline that captivated Rome. From Cicero, who explicitly acknowledged his debt to Greek rhetorical theory, to Quintilian, whose Institutia Oratoria was a comprehensive guide to Roman oratorical education, Greek masters provided the foundational techniques. Athenian schools of rhetoric, and those in Rhodes, like the school of Apollonius Molon, where Cicero himself studied, trained Roman students in elocution, argumentation, and stylistic elegance, skills essential for success in the Roman Senate, the law courts, and imperial administration. The ability to speak eloquently and persuasively in both Latin and Greek became a hallmark of the truly distinguished Roman. Beyond philosophy and rhetoric, Greek centres excelled in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and history. Greek physicians like Galen of Pergamon, who practiced extensively in Rome, were widely regarded as the most skilled in the ancient world, their treatises forming the basis of Roman medical practice for centuries. Greek historians from Polybius to Cassius Dio meticulously documented Roman expansion and imperial history, often providing insights and perspectives that Roman authors themselves lacked. The Great Library of Alexandria, though outside mainland Greece, remained an unparalleled repository of Greek scientific and literary knowledge, attracting scholars from across the empire, including Romans seeking specialized learning. The patronage of emperors further solidified Athens' position. Augustus, who admired Greek culture, exempted Athens from various taxes and granted it significant privileges. Hadrian, the most Hellenophilic of emperors, lavished attention and resources on the city, embarking on ambitious building projects that included the completion of the colossal Temple of Olympian Zeus, a new library, and a gymnasium. He frequently visited Athens, participated in its festivals, and was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, elevating the city's status and attracting even more Roman visitors and scholars. This imperial investment transformed Athens from a provincial town into a flourishing academic metropolis, a beacon of learning under the Roman eagle. This constant flow of Roman students, patrons, and administrators into Greek intellectual centres created a dynamic, albeit often unequal, exchange. Romans brought their pragmatism, their organisational skills, and their vast resources. Greeks offered their profound intellectual heritage, their sophisticated analytical tools, and their timeless pursuit of knowledge. Greek became the undisputed language of higher learning and philosophy across the entire Eastern Roman Empire, and a prestige language in the West. It was the language in which many emperors, including Nero and Marcus Aurelius, preferred to think and write when engaging with deep philosophical questions. Ultimately, Greek wisdom became the very bedrock of imperial thought, subtly shaping Roman legal principles, ethical codes, and political ideology. The Roman concept of lex naturae, natural law for instance, was profoundly influenced by Stoic ideas of a universal rational order. The idea of the ideal ruler, just and philosophical, mirrored Hellenistic concepts of the philosopher king. The Roman Empire, in its vastness and diversity, found a unifying intellectual framework in the enduring wisdom of Greece. The Greek intellectual centres, especially Athens, thus performed a crucial function. They not only preserved the legacy of Hellenic genius, but actively transmitted and integrated it into the cultural and intellectual fabric of the Roman world, ensuring that the vanquished, in this realm, profoundly and eternally shaped their conqueror. The voices of Plato, Aristotle, and Zeno, once confined to the agora, now echoed through the very halls of Roman power. The final chapter of Greece's transformation under Rome was a testament to the enduring power of culture in the face of imperial might. From its humble beginnings as an opportunistic protector against Illyrian pirates, Rome had inexorably tightened its grip on the Hellenic world, culminating in the brutal obliteration of Corinth and the formal annexation of its ancient city-states. Greece, the cradle of Western civilization, was now an integral yet politically subjugated part of the vast Roman Empire, its destiny irrevocably entwined with that of its conqueror. Yet, in this subjugation lay a profound paradox. Politically conquered, Greece became Rome's cultural master, an eternal fount of art, learning and thought that would shape the very identity of the Roman world and, through it, the future of Western civilization. By the dawn of the imperial age, Greece was formally divided into the provinces of Macedonia and Achaea. Macedonia, a vast and strategically vital territory, guarded the northern frontiers of the empire against barbarian incursions, its legions securing the trade routes that crisscrossed the Balkans. Achaea, encompassing the ancient heartland of Hellas, was nominally a senatorial province, enjoying a degree of prestige and light military presence, a reflection of its cultural rather than strategic importance. Its governance was firmly Roman, with proconsuls and their staffs overseeing local affairs, administering justice, and ensuring the steady flow of tribute to Rome. The ancient leagues were long dissolved, and the city-states, though retaining some semblance of civic life, operated under the ultimate authority of the distant emperor and senate. The Pax Romana, the enduring peace enforced by Roman legions, brought an unprecedented era of stability to Greece. The ceaseless internecine wars, the territorial disputes, and the constant threat of larger Hellenistic kingdoms that had plagued the region for centuries were finally over. Roman roads, often built for military movement, now facilitated trade and communication across the peninsula, connecting scattered communities. The suppression of piracy, a foundational Roman pretext for intervention, ensured safe maritime commerce, revitalizing port cities like Athens and the spectacularly rebuilt Corinth, refounded as a Roman colony and swiftly regaining its status as a major commercial hub linking east and west. While Greek trade routes and resources were indeed reshaped to serve imperial ambitions, this also meant access to the vast Roman market, bringing a new form of prosperity, albeit one dictated by Roman needs and often accompanied by exploitation from Roman publicani and land speculators. Despite its political subjugation and the economic shifts, Greece remained a vibrant fount of culture, art, and learning. Athens, especially, flourished under imperial patronage, becoming the unofficial university city of the Roman Empire. Its ancient philosophical schools, the Academy, Lyceum, Stoa, and Garden, continued to attract Roman aristocrats and intellectuals eager to complete their education. Emperors like Hadrian, deeply Hellenophilic, lavished attention and resources on Athens, commissioning magnificent new buildings, promoting its festivals, and frequently visiting its hallowed grounds. These institutions, alongside similar centres in Rhodes and Asia Minor, became indispensable for the education of the Roman elite, shaping their understanding of ethics, rhetoric, and statesmanship. The wisdom of Greek philosophers, particularly Stoicism, became the bedrock of imperial thought, providing a moral and intellectual framework for Roman governance and personal conduct, profoundly influencing figures from Cicero to Marcus Aurelius. The artistic legacy of Greece permeated every aspect of Roman aesthetics. Roman art and architecture, while distinctively Roman in their pragmatism and grandeur, were undeniably built upon Greek foundations. Greek sculptural forms, architectural orders, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and artistic themes were absorbed, emulated, and adapted. Roman villas were adorned with copies of Greek masterpieces, Roman temples adopted Greek colonnades, and Roman portraiture, while striving for realism, often incorporated the idealized forms of Hellenistic sculpture. The Roman taste for luxury and beauty fueled a massive demand for Greek craftsmanship, from exquisite bronzes to intricately carved gems, ensuring that Greek artists and artisans, whether in their homeland or working in Rome, continued to thrive. The Greek language, far from fading, became the lingua franca of the Eastern Roman Empire and a prestige language in the West. Any educated Roman was expected to be bilingual, conversant in both Latin and Greek. Greek was the language of science, medicine, philosophy, and much of the administration in the eastern provinces. Important Roman histories, scientific treatises, and even imperial edicts were often written in Greek, testifying to its enduring intellectual and administrative utility. The literary tradition, though now largely written by Romans in Latin, consciously engaged with and built upon Greek predecessors, with poets like Virgil and Horace crafting masterpieces that were deeply Hellenized in their themes, forms, and mythological references. This profound cultural absorption meant that, while Rome had militarily conquered Greece, Greece had culturally conquered Rome. The Roman Empire, in its very essence, became a Greco-Roman civilization, a powerful synthesis that married Roman organizational genius, legal acumen, and martial might, with Greek intellectual brilliance, artistic sensitivity, and philosophical depth. This hybrid culture, forged in the crucible of conquest and assimilation, would be the lasting legacy of the Roman Empire. For the Greek people themselves, the long centuries under Roman rule fostered a complex identity. They were Roman subjects, yet they remained fiercely proud of their Hellenic heritage, often viewing themselves as the cultural superiors of their conquerors. They navigated this reality through adaptation and a quiet, persistent preservation of their traditions. Their Eleutheria, once a battle cry for political independence, transmuted into a cultural freedom, an unshakable confidence in the enduring value of their language, their literature, their philosophy, and their artistic genius. Thus, when the Western Roman Empire eventually collapsed, the Hellenic East, the Greek-speaking half of the empire, continued for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire, a direct heir to this Greco-Roman synthesis. Its laws were Roman, its administration Roman, but its language was Greek, its theology deeply rooted in Greek philosophy, and its cultural identity profoundly Hellenic. The Roman conquest of Greece, initially an act of ruthless power, ultimately ensured that the light of Hellenic civilization, far from being extinguished, became an integral, eternal flame within the vast Roman edifice, profoundly shaping its conqueror and through it, the enduring foundations of the Western world.